Right, so we've just navigated the intricate pathways of Parmenides' core arguments in his poem. Now, let's turn our attention to some of the surviving fragments and testimonies about him. These aren't just dry quotes, they're like archaeological shards, offering glimpses into the mind of this foundational thinker and how later generations grappled with his ideas. Let's kick things off with fragment 14. We see Nyctophaea's night shining. Think stars, or maybe the moon reflecting sunlight. The key phrase here is alatrion phos, an alien light. Now for Parmenides, who often stresses the unity and sameness of reality, what does this alien light signify? Is it just a poetic description, or is it hinting at something beyond the single unchanging being he champions? It introduces this idea of difference, of otherness, right there in the cosmos itself. It's like saying, even in this unified whole, there are distinct elements, perhaps hinting at the multiplicity that Parmenides ultimately denies but acknowledges in the phenomenal world. It sets a slightly different tone than his main argument, doesn't it? Fragment 15 talks about things always falling towards the rays of the sun. This sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Like planets orbiting the sun, or maybe just the way shadows fall. But think about it in the context of Parmenides. He's all about the static, the unchanging one. Yet here we have motion, direction, a constant pull towards something. It's fascinating because it acknowledges the observable mechanics of the cosmos, even if it's likely presented as part of the appearance, the pathos, that masks the underlying truth of being. It's like saying, yes, things move and interact in space, but fundamentally, they are part of that single, indivisible reality. It's a subtle nod to the physical world without abandoning his metaphysical core. Now, fragment 16 gets really interesting. It dives into the relationship between mind and body, kris and meleon. The core idea is that just as a body has its temperament, its inherent nature, so too is the mind present. Mind isn't some separate ethereal thing floating above the body, it's tied to it. And awareness phronein, the very capacity to think, is part of the body's essential nature, phys. What's really striking is the final line, togar pleon estet noema, for the preponderant is the thought the mind conceives. Thought, conception, noema, is what's primary, what holds more weight. This suggests a kind of emergent property or perhaps a fundamental identity where mental states are directly linked to physical constitution. It's a fascinating precursor to later debates about dualism versus materialism, suggesting that for Parmenides, thinking is deeply rooted in being physical. This fragment essentially echoes and reinforces the point made in the previous one. It hammers home the idea that the fundamental nature of being, or perhaps the nature of thinking beings, is the same across the board. It's tied to bodily awareness. And again, it stresses that thought, noema, is the dominant factor. It's like saying, forget abstract thinking for a moment. The very ground of our cognition is physical, and the act of conceiving of thinking is paramount. It connects the individual's mental state directly back to their physical makeup, suggesting a holistic view where mind and body are intrinsically linked, and thought itself is the defining characteristic. Okay, fragment 18 takes a sudden turn. From deep metaphysics to something surprisingly practical, to the right-handed parents' boys, to the left-handed girls. Wow, talk about a shift. What's going on here? Well, this seems to be a piece of folk wisdom or medical observation from the time. It suggests a belief that the dominant hand, the temper of the parents, somehow determined the sex of the child. Now, how does this fit with Parmenides? Perhaps he saw it as an example of how underlying principles, the temper, manifest in observable outcomes, the child's sex. Or maybe it's just a throwaway line, showing he was aware of everyday beliefs, even if he didn't necessarily endorse them philosophically. It's a quirky little glimpse into the world he inhabited, linking the cosmic to the domestic. Fragment 19 expands on that previous fragment, giving us a more elaborate account of reproduction. It uses the language of mixing seeds, German, from mother and father carried by blood, sanguine potency, virtus. If this mixture maintains due measure, temporium, it creates well-formed bodies. But if the potencies conflict and don't produce a single harmonious result, disaster strikes. The Furies vex the nascent child with double seed. See the pattern? It's all about balance, harmony, and the right measure. This resonates strongly with the Eleatic emphasis on logical consistency and the nature of being. It's like applying their principles of unity and proper proportion to the messy business of making babies. It also shows how these philosophical ideas could permeate discussions of natural phenomena, even if mediated through a specific theoretical framework, possibly influenced by later schools like the Stoics or Peripatetics, as noted by the commentators. Fragment 20 brings us back to a broader cosmological perspective. Parmenides seems to be outlining a cycle. Things come into being, ta the kat genesin, exist now, peshi, and will eventually end, apoto the teleftisushi. This is a stark contrast to his main argument where being is timeless and unchanging. So, what gives? Maybe this is referring to the world of appearance, the pathos, the realm of becoming and perishing that we experience. And then the final line. On them men bestowed a name to give its mark to each. Humans impose names, categories, distinctions onto this flowing reality. It's a reminder that even while denying change in the ultimate reality, Parmenides acknowledges the temporal flux of the experienced world and our human need to label and categorize it. It's like saying, yes, things seem to pop up and disappear, and we slap labels on them, but underneath it all, there's the one. All right, let's switch gears to Plato. In the Symposium, we find some fascinating references. When discussing Eros, the god of love, Agathon says nobody knows his parents. But then Phaedrus brings up Hesiod and Parmenides. Both agree that after chaos came Earth and Eros. Parmenides himself, according to a Acusilaus cited by Plato, also placed Eros very early in the cosmic order. This is significant because it shows Parmenides' cosmology wasn't just an abstract exercise. It was being absorbed and referenced by later thinkers like Acusilaus, and even woven into Plato's own dialogues. It positions Eros not just as a later invention, but as one of the primordial forces alongside Earth, right there at the beginning, according to this influential school of thought. But wait, Plato throws another curveball in the Symposium. Socrates argues that Eros is actually the youngest god, forever youthful. He contrasts this with the older myths involving Hesiod and Parmenides, where the gods are violent, castrating each other, locking people up. Socrates says this violence wasn't really Eros's doing, it was necessity, anangi, the harsh force governing the world. If Eros were truly present, things would be gentler. How does this relate to Parmenides? Well, Parmenides' system, with its focus on the unchanging indivisible one, could be interpreted as lacking this violent, necessary drive. It presents a cosmos of rest and unity perhaps seen by Socrates as inherently peaceful, unlike the turbulent world governed by necessity. It's a fascinating reinterpretation, using Parmenides' ideas to build a different picture of the gods. Now, Plato's dialogue of Parmenides gives us a wonderful anecdote, relayed by Antiphon. Imagine the scene, the great Panathenaic festival in Athens. There's Zeno, young, handsome, full of promise, and his mentor, Parmenides, already quite elderly, gray, but still noble-looking. The text even hints at a personal connection, mentioning Zeno as Parmenides' former lover. Can you imagine the buzz around these two? And Socrates, just a kid then, hanging out with them, eager to hear Zeno's new writings. This isn't just abstract philosophy, it's human drama. It grounds the abstract ideas in real people and a real historical moment, showing the transmission of thought wasn't just writing, but also mentorship and personal interaction. It adds a layer of warmth and humanity to these towering figures. Here's where things get really interesting in the Parmenides. Socrates is confused. Parmenides says all is one. Zeno says it is not many, yet they sound alike. Zeno clarifies, you haven't got it, Socrates. His book, he says, is a defense for Parmenides. Why? Because critics mock Parmenides for his conclusions. If being is one, it can't be generated or destroyed, etc. So, Zeno's strategy was brilliant. Use paradoxes, show how absurd the opposite position, that things are many is. It's classic reductio ad absurdum. By pushing the many to its logical extremes, he defends the one. It's like saying, look, if you deny the one, you end up with nonsense, therefore the one must be true. Clever, huh? Parmenides then gives Socrates some advice. You want to define beauty, justice, goodness? Hold on. Get proper training first. What kind of training? Something that seems useless, idle talk, adaleskia to the many. This sounds suspiciously like Zeno's paradoxes. Parmenides basically says, you need to go through this rigorous, seemingly nonsensical dialectical process before you can grasp the simple forms. Otherwise, truth will slip away from you. It's a powerful statement about the method of philosophy. It suggests that understanding complex truths requires wrestling with counterintuitive ideas and logical puzzles first. You can't just jump straight to the answer. You have to train your mind in a particular way. Socrates asks what this training is. Parmenides points to Zeno again. Zeno laughs and says, The many don't realize you can't encounter truth without this indirect, comprehensive method. He then pleads with Parmenides to teach again. Parmenides reluctantly agrees, using a fantastic metaphor. He compares himself to an old racehorse trembling before a chariot race, forced against his will into the lists of love, meaning dialectic. It's a beautiful image. It captures the immense effort, the potential reluctance, and the sheer scale of the intellectual challenge involved in engaging in this deep dialectical exploration. Even a master like Parmenides feels the strain of diving back into this demanding sea of arguments. So Parmenides agrees to play this game. Where do they start? What's the first step? He proposes beginning with himself and his own hypothesis. And what is that hypothesis? Consider what must result if the one taken is, or if it is not. Boom. Right there is the crux of Parmenides' entire argument. Everything hinges on this initial assumption about the nature of being. If being is, what follows? If being is not, what follows? This sets the stage for the entire investigation that Parmenides lays out in his poem, as filtered through Plato's dialogue. It's the foundational question, the starting point from which all subsequent reasoning flows. Simple yet profound. Moving to the Theaetetus, Socrates reflects on different philosophical stances. He mentions those who hold views opposite to Heraclitus, the Melicises and Parmenideses. Who were they? Thinkers like Melissus, who followed Parmenides, arguing that everything is one, unmoved, self-contained, having no room to move. Socrates admits he feels less ashamed discussing these guys collectively than just Parmenides alone. Why? Because Parmenides seemed so venerable and awesome to him when he met him as a young man. It shows Socrates held Parmenides in high regard, despite finding his doctrines baffling or difficult to accept. It highlights the respect Parmenides commanded, even among critical thinkers like Socrates. In the Sophist, we get another mention of Parmenides, this time regarding his method. Someone suggests proceeding by questions, just like Parmenides used to do when Socrates was young and Parmenides was old. This reinforces the image of Parmenides as a master of dialectic, someone who engaged in thorough argumentation and questioning. It connects directly to the main task of the sophist dialogue, which is precisely to define the sophist through a process of questioning and cross-examination. Parmenides serves as an exemplar of the kind of rigorous argumentative approach needed for such a complex inquiry. This is a crucial passage in the Sophist. The visitor lays out Parmenides' central prohibition. For this principle shall never be vanquished, so as to allow things to be that are not. But do you keep your thought from this way when you are inquiring? In other words, don't even try to investigate what is not. Don't ask about non-being because that leads to falsehood, and falsehood isn't real. But here's the rub. The visitor and Socrates are trying to define the sophist, who is not a true philosopher. They are, in effect, trying to investigate what is not a philosopher. Talk about walking the tightrope. They acknowledge Parmenides' rule, but feel compelled to break it to achieve their goal. This tension drives much of the dialogue. The visitor explicitly states their plan. We must put Father Parmenides' account to the test, and argue fiercely that what is not in some way is, and in turn that what is somehow is not. They're basically saying, okay, Parmenides told us not to go there, but we have to. To understand the sophist, we need to explore the boundaries between being and not being, truth and falsehood. This is the philosophical tightrope walk made explicit. They recognize the authority of Parmenides' prohibition, but feel intellectually obligated to push beyond it to achieve clarity on their specific subject. It's a bold move, acknowledging the debt owed to the master while forging a new path. Now, the visitor really starts dissecting the monists, including Parmenides' followers. He calls their approach casual, like telling children stories. One thing is, three things are, hot and cold mix. He criticizes them for looking down on others and not caring if people follow or get left behind. Then comes the direct challenge. When they talk about hot and cold mixing, or separations and combinations, what exactly do they mean? It's a powerful critique. The visitor isn't just dismissing their conclusions, he's questioning the very clarity and communicability of their reasoning. He's forcing them to defend their terms and concepts, setting the stage for a deeper logical analysis. This is where the visitor gets really logical, almost playful. He asks the monists, do you say only one thing is? Yes. Do you call being something? Yes. Okay, so is being the same as one? Or are you using two names for the same thing? If it's one name, that's ridiculous if you only allow one thing. If it's multiple names, that implies multiple things. If the name is different from the thing, you're talking about two things. If the name is the same as the thing, the name becomes a name of a name. It's a brilliant logical trap. The visitor shows that the very language the monists use leads to contradictions unless you allow for more than one thing. It highlights the problem of how we name and categorize reality. The visitor continues his assault. He asks, is the whole different from the one thing or the same? The monists say same, but Parmenides himself described the one as like a spherical ball, implying it has parts, center, extremities. If the one has parts, then it can't be truly simple in the strictest sense, Amir. So, the whole, which has parts, can't be identical to the one, strictly simple. This creates a dilemma. Either the one isn't the same as the whole, meaning things are more than one, or the whole is less than itself, which is absurd. It's another clever logical maneuver, showing that defining the one in terms of wholeness leads to paradox unless you concede multiplicity. The visitor wraps up his refutation. If the one loses its identity by being a whole with parts, then it's not true being. Therefore, everything must be more than one. Even if you try to avoid the concept of the whole, anything that comes to be must be a whole. So being must include the whole. And if something isn't whole, it can't have quantity. The conclusion? Trying to pin down being as simply one or two leads to endless puzzles and contradictions. It's like saying, look, your initial idea, however appealing, just doesn't hold up under scrutiny. It forces us to acknowledge multiplicity and complexity. This sets the stage for the visitor's own, more nuanced account of being later in the dialogue. Right at the end of this intense logical workout, the visitor makes a direct admission. I suppose you know that we have disobeyed Parmenides and gone far beyond what he prohibited. They've done it. They've demonstrated that things that are not are, and they've even figured out the form of what is not. It's a full confession of the transgression that was necessary to get to this point. It frames the entire preceding argument not just as a critique of Parmenides, but as a deliberate, necessary violation of his rules to gain deeper insight. It's a bold claim, acknowledging the intellectual debt while asserting the progress made. Let's move to Xenophon. In the Memorabilia, he expresses surprise that people don't realize humans can't easily figure out the nature of all things. Why? Because even the experts disagree wildly. They treat each other like madmen. He lists the classic clashes. Some say one thing exists, others infinite things. Some say everything moves, others nothing moves. Some say things come to be and perish, others say nothing ever does. And who are the ones holding the one position? Parmenides and Melissus. Xenophon presents this as a field of bitter disagreement, highlighting the difficulty and divisiveness of these fundamental metaphysical questions, contrasting it with his own focus on practical ethics and self-knowledge. Isocrates, in one of his orations, gives us a list of different ancient views on the number of things. It's like a snapshot of philosophical diversity around 353 BC. You've got the anonymous guy saying unlimited number. Empedocles with his 4 elements plus love and strife. Ion with 3, Alcmaeon with 2. And then Parmenides and Melissus with 1. And finally Gorgias the skeptic, saying nothing at all. Isocrates advises the young to study these things but not get stuck on them. It shows Parmenides' one view as just one point on a spectrum of ancient cosmological speculation, presented somewhat objectively, perhaps as historical background rather than current orthodoxy. Diogenes Laertius, our biographer of philosophers, quotes Alcidamas saying that Zeno and Empedocles were students of Parmenides at the same time, before later going their separate ways. This is fascinating. It confirms the mentor-student relationship between Parmenides and Zeno, which we already knew. But adding Empedocles to the list is significant. Empedocles was a major rival, developing a completely different cosmology based on 4 elements and the forces of love and strife. Knowing they were classmates under Parmenides adds a layer of rivalry and intellectual cross-pollination to the story. It suggests Parmenides had a wide influence, even if his students ended up disagreeing profoundly. Even generations later, Parmenides was still being studied within the prestigious academy founded by Plato. Speusippus, Plato's nephew and successor as head, apparently wrote that Parmenides gave laws to his fellow citizens. This hints at his civic role, perhaps linking his philosophy to practical governance. More importantly, Xenocrates, another later head of the academy, compiled a whole work specifically titled On Parmenides. This shows sustained scholarly interest in his work, treating him not just as a historical figure, but as a subject worthy of dedicated, critical study. His ideas clearly hadn't faded away, they were still being wrestled with. Now Aristotle, he engages with Parmenides, but with a critical eye. In the Protrepticus, he mentions Anaxagoras and Parmenides as seeking wisdom. Okay, fair enough, but in De Philosophia he gets tougher. He calls Parmenides and Melissus restive against nature because they denied motion, and unnatural because they denied nature's principle of motion. Ouch. That's a strong critique. In On Sophistical Refutations, Aristotle points out the confusion caused by words like being and one. Some think they mean the same thing everywhere, while others, refuting Zeno and Parmenides, argue they have many meanings. Aristotle sees this ambiguity in language as a key factor in the disputes. He acknowledges Parmenides' quest but firmly disagrees with his conclusions and highlights the linguistic complexities he introduced. Aristotle really digs into Parmenides in his Physics. He argues forcefully that the Eleatic's denial of generation and perishing belongs to a different prior inquiry metaphysics, not natural philosophy. They wrongly took conclusions about ungenerated, imperishable, being derived from thinking about principles and applied them back to the sensible world. Then he systematically dismantles their arguments. Considering whether being is one and unmoved is like discussing any arbitrary thesis, not real science. It's invalid because it assumes false premises and ignores the fact that being is said in many ways substance, quantity, quality. He shows that if you assume all things are substance, or all things are quantity, or all things are quality, you run into contradictions. If being is continuous, it's divisible infinitely. If indivisible, nothing has quantity or quality. If all things are one in account like clothes and garments, you end up with Heraclitus' view, or even nothingness. Aristotle's critique is thorough. Parmenides failed because he didn't properly analyze the different meanings of being and ignored the principles of natural change. So, wrapping up, what we see in these fragments and testimonies is a truly remarkable figure. Parmenides wasn't just a dry theorist, he was a profound thinker wrestling with the very fabric of reality, being, and thought itself. He used paradox, dialectic, and a powerful emphasis on logical consistency. His influence ripples through Plato, Aristotle, and the entire history of Western philosophy. The questions he raised about change, multiplicity, and the nature of truth continue to echo. He challenged us to look beyond appearances, to seek the unchanging core, and in doing so, fundamentally shaped how we think about the world. His legacy is complex, challenging, and undeniably enduring.